I'm going to read you a story that first appeared in Galaxy in May 1969. A Man Spekith by Richard Wilson. 1. Don't read this. It's in Old English and the spelling is different. Quote, jangling is when a man speaketh to much beforen folk, and clappeth as a mill, and taketh no keep what he saith. Now that you've read it anyway, you bright ones, I'll tell you that Geoffrey Chaucer wrote it in The Parson's Tale. What he said was, but I needn't translate, you probably had no more trouble with it than if you'd been listening to the kind of English disc jockeys once spoke on rock radio stations. This is a story of a jangler nearly 700 years removed from Geoffrey's time. It's the tale of a disc jockey named Jabber McGabber, which he sometimes called himself. At other times, at other contemporary music stations, as they called themselves, he was known as Esoteric Ed, or Happy Mac, or James the First. For he moved on. He moved from Cincinnati to Akron to Chicago to Phoenix. He dreamed of making the big time in New York, but that call never came. Another kind of call came, though. It came in Phoenix, where he took the fancy of an eccentric billionaire who owned, among things and people, a radio television network, an advertising agency, a movie studio, a publishing house, a university, several electronics companies, a city of some size in the Southwest. He owned most of the real estate and enough of the politicians, one way or another, and a deactivated rocket base in the desert. You know the name of the billionaire and the single-minded determination with which he went after anything he wanted. More about him later. Our disc jockey's real name was Edward James McHenry. He was 38 years old now, and sometimes he had to force it. The old spontaneity wasn't always there. The drive had ebbed. The zing had zung. Once the words had tumbled out, more of them than he could articulate, but now it took an effort to make them flow. His delivery was more deliberate, not rehearsed, but thought out. It comforted him to know his plight was not unique. A writer had told him of times when it took a monumental effort to roll a sheet of paper into the typewriter. He'd known artists who'd said similar. He'd known poets, too, and peasants. Oh, yes, I've known poets and peasants and pallbearers and priests and princes, crossed my path or I theirs, in foreign climes and on native shores, for princes travel. And I've known princesses, native-born like Grace K. Rainier and Rita H. Kahn, and those of alien corn like Elizabeth and Margaret, not to mention what's-her-name and whoses. But I've strayed from my theme, which is music, so I'll get off and spin a record, as we used to say before tape. Spin with me, won't you, as we enjoy the sounds of the Jefferson Airplane. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, he was on again. He'd prepared for the end of the music. In the old days, it would have been off the cuff, off the top of the head, off the world. Wasn't that the most? Where can you go from there, except elsewhere? And so we spin you on, you spinnable people, to the obligatory scene, if you remember Drama 201. We spin you, I say, to this world, to this word from our sponsor, this important announcement. Friends, fellow human beings, mortals like me, are you troubled with irregularity? He went on too long, unnecessarily identifying, stretching it out. You may have wondered who's been talking here, because besides Ed, I mean, words don't come out of a void, especially when they're not Ed's words, and Ed's the last man alive. I've been talking. Me, Marty. I'm a machine. That's what the first letter of my acronym stands for. My full name is Machine Amplifying Rationalizations Treating of Your, or maybe it's Machine Assessing Reality as Told to You. It doesn't matter. The acronym makers are long gone. I realize that as a machine I should be positive. I shouldn't tell you different things or variations of the same thing and claim there's no real difference. To do this is to be guilty of what somebody called terminological inexactitude. I think the somebody was Winston Churchill. Of course, I don't really mean I really think. That would be a lie. And it would not do to have a machine capable of lying, especially since one of my functions is to amend, correct, edit, amplify, and otherwise make more meaningful for posterity the mouthings of esoteric Ed. But first, let's listen some more to Ed. Ed. Sometimes I tell different stories up here in the lonely. I make up alternative pasts for myself. I use different names for my different pasts, for my different moods. Some days I'm Gaylord Gugnall, sole survivor of a destroyed world and devil-may-care chronicler of its last agony. Except that I do care. My nonchalance disguises the deep hurt I felt and feel at the death of Earth. Sometimes I'm Hank Hardcastle, steely-eyed hero of 1,000 thrilling adventures, scion of a near-noble family. Other times I'm Harry Protagonist, space disc jockey, who's been set whirling in the void on an unfathomable mission. I need to communicate my fears, hopes, fantasies, and above all, my puzzlement to my imagined listeners. Sometimes I forget who I really am. A person can tamper just so long with what he is, pretending to be another, before he becomes to some extent one of those other selves. Then his own self is lost or blurred. Too much blurring is bad. It's desirable sometimes to hide from oneself, to pretend to merge the ego into a fantasy personality, to live or dream vicariously, but I may be overdoing it. Who am I, really? Does it matter as long as I get through the day? I owe myself and you, my listeners, that much. It is my duty to you and to myself. But a certain tranquility is needed to reach the end of the day. Some achieved this by natural talent, by their own very vivaciousness or stick-to-itiveness. Doggedly they breathed in and out and took sustenance from time to time and went to the bathroom to rid themselves of the residue of previous substance taking, and did a little work, and lo, it was a new day. Some never achieved the new day. They funked it. They flunked out. Others got there, though, by drink or drugs or pot. I speak of back then, you understand, before the now. You may have noticed that I'm not always lucid, though once in a nightclub I was Larry Lucid, explainer of contemporary society to those less informed. But I coped. I used music. I always had something on, either on the hi-fi or the radio. I used to bounce through the day on a big beat that included me in because it just naturally assumed that everybody was a part of it and approached and throbbed along with it, and so I was one with all that went on. But that was long ago. And now I'm part of nothing because nothing is going on. The only thing that goes on is what I make happen, and even that may not be real. They've done something to me. I feel banded like a Canadian duck. I don't have a circlet around wrist or ankle, but I know something's got me somewhere. Maybe I've been implanted. I've always be, I've already been tapped and bugged. I read once that some ornithologists had attached a radio to a condor to find out how far it went for food or to rest or whatever condors do to get by. I didn't find out whether the condor knew it'd been bugged, but I know something's been done to me and I resent it. I don't mind doing my bit for science, but if they've tampered with my human dignity, if they've psyched me in the psyche, Marty, this is Marty again. I'll tell you more about the man who put our hero up here. His name was John Potter Purnell, and because he was a sanitary facilities manufacturer, he was known as Potty or John. Sometimes he was called Young Potty to distinguish him from his father, also known as Potty, and to a few intimates as Poopy. Young Potty, at 50, was still in his father's shadow. The old man had founded the business and made the original millions. Hygienic Inc. manufactured most of the country's and later the world's toilets, urinals, sinks, towel racks, and dispensaries of sanitary and prophylactic devices. The millions and then the billions that poured in at such a rate that when Poopy retired, Potty could have sat back and let inertia provide opulently for him and all his heirs. But Potty, he really preferred John, had come late to the presidency and wasn't content to let Hygienic expand at a safe, sure rate. He established a foundation that awarded grants for research. He set up an experimental division, hired scientists, and turned them loose to work at their own pace and let him know when they'd got something. He sponsored a competition to design a better bidet. He sent engineers to Washington to see what Hygienic could do in the space program. It was Potty's emissaries to NASA who led to the hiring of Ed. They got him from a subsidiary company, Arizona Air Talk, for which he'd been broadcasting as Jim McHenry, Jock of the Desert. The Jock's music talk show was the despair of competitors in the rock radio game. We'll come back to Ed. Here's some information about me, Marty, the machine. It's not as if I'm a machine, singular. I'm the end product of many machines, sophisticated and otherwise. I know everything they know because I'm the synthesis, the reincarnation of all of them. Let me answer your other unspoken question, whomever you are. Why don't I sound like a machine? How come I come on colloquial instead of respectfully as befits the man-machine relationship, like you master, me robot, or solemnly like the data you have requisitioned are stored in circuits in subtank 4739C of my vast interconnected memory banks. There will be an unavoidable delay while the necessary hookups are made to retrieve this rarely requested material.